So we now come to our first keynote of EntreConf, the incredible story of a teenage coder who created a business worth $1 billion. We'll be shortly hearing from Christian Owens. This session is in conjunction with Isio, and our thanks to them. And I have Max and Mark from Isio here to come and give us a bit more info about their business. Here we go. Welcome. So let's have the elevator pitch of Isio.
I'll probably take that one first for a moment. So a lot of you probably have not heard of Isio. We were spun out of KPMG about 5 years ago as a pension investment consulting business. Now, that's probably the least sexiest description of a business you'll hear over the next 2 days. I think I can probably guarantee that. But we were set up really to try and challenge the industry and try and do things differently. And so we sort of spun out with this entrepreneurial sort of mindset, a sort of startup mentality, which admittedly we were probably slightly bigger than many of you in terms of your startup sort of profile. But we're looking to change and challenge the industry, and I think we're doing a pretty good job so far. That entrepreneurial sort of startup approach was really put to the test because we started up 3 weeks before COVID, which is a challenge, I think, for everyone, but particularly when you're trying to start a new business. So I think we represent the wealth management part of the business. Myself, I'm Mark Campbell, Max Borden on the private capital side of the business. I think if I think about actually what I've all just said, what does it really mean to yourselves? Well, I think it comes back to Kate's point around the journey that you're all on. We like to think that we can support in those early conversations around how you finance your business, how you start it up, and how you get going, whether that's through sort of personal sort of assets, etc. We also think that we can help in terms of, as you grow, that sort of looking after your staff. We've got an employee benefits business that helps just really retain staff, make sure they're really feeling the love, as it were, and see their future with you as an organisation. We also look at sort of things like key man risk, etc. as well, so helping use of that through that transition. And then, as we were talking about earlier, it's around, as your wealth builds, what does that really mean to you? What's the long-term ambition and aim and goal for all of that? And that's the bit that we'll help with as well, whether that's preserving it, whether it's growing it, whether it's passing on to the next generation, whether it's thinking about your retirement. It differs for everyone, and that's the key thing, is it's got to work for you as individuals. So that's the point at which sort of the wealth management side of things can help. But if you're lucky enough to be in the situation that you then sell your business and come into a degree of capital, that's where Max and his team come over and can support as well. So I'll let you talk about your side of things.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's right. And I think any liquidity event, no matter how big, it is really a really significant moment for any founder or entrepreneur. And I think at that point, there's a lot of new questions to be asked. What comes next? What's the purpose of this wealth? What else comes in the journey of a founder? And even looking beyond to the next generation. And they're the types of questions that we work with founders to help answer. And I think our approach, we take quite an institutional approach, which is different in the market. We have, we advise on 300 billion around pension fund assets, endowments, charities as well. And so we bring that sort of institutional depth to founders. We help them unlock the doors that they may not have. That they're entering a totally new world that they may not have experienced before. We're here to inform, guide, and coach them through that journey, but also provide, the real advice that they need on their investment strategy. Can they do that in a sustainable way? Is the governance in place to set up, or even just act as a mentor? And I think just having someone to spar with, having those difficult conversations can really be quite helpful in that next step in that life cycle.
Is that how you would say your approach differs then to maybe others on the market?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think having that size and scale really allows us to have that access that perhaps other competitors may not have. I think, as Mark's saying, being founded in March 2020 was quite challenging, being honest with you. But we've really carried that mindset forward in that we're challenging the industry to think differently. using that scale as well, the industry actually listens to us. And so it's really great when we get challenged, we can challenge the industry to come up with something quite different that no one else is doing.
Yeah, quite an entrepreneurial mindset yourselves. Why do you like working with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you just probably need to look around the room and what a fascinating group of people entrepreneurs are. You all think differently. You engage differently. You challenge us in particular. You're not afraid to challenge us, and that's why you've got to where you have. You look at the challenges, the problems, the issues. You like to work out the solutions, and we like to do that with you. I think also, it from our slightly selfish perspective, it's actually where we feel that we can add most value, because you're on a journey, and we want to be a small part of that journey to help you succeed and support that success in the future. So we find that actually entrepreneurs are by far probably the more interesting sort of group of people that we work with as a result of that.
Thank you so much. We're going to hear from those incredibly inspiring, interesting entrepreneurs very shortly. And thank you so much to Isio for sponsoring this panel. Thank you to Max Borden and Mark Campbell. And now it's our very great pleasure to welcome to the stage Christian Owens, and welcome Greg back for the interview.
Well. We talk about. I'll come and sit next to you. How about that? Is that a bit intimate?
Yes.
Oh, it is a bit intimate. Sorry.
But I mean, we're all friends here, aren't we?
We're all friends here. We do want to hear this extraordinary story. And just one thing, by the way, about that EntreConvivial. That's on July the 8th, and those finalists on the EntreConf Awards will have already had some comms on that. But please do join us for that. This is a quite remarkable story, and we'll come on to your personal backstory, the teenage coder. I think you were coding from the age of 13. But I want you to begin by giving us the nutshell of what your business Paddle is, what it does, and we'll come on to its genesis. So just where it is now, what it does.
Yeah. Sort of every single one of these sort of so far today has been people talking about how boring their businesses are. So I'll continue on the trend. Paddle.
Spoiler alert, it's not boring. Come on.
Paddle builds the infrastructure that powers sort of software companies and apps from kind of a billing perspective. So when you're building a software company or an app or something like that, and you're selling to people in hundreds of countries around the world, there's lots of sort of the guts of the company that's incredibly boring, that isn't sort of the reason that you started the business, that you have to get very good at very quickly as a small business, kind of taking on and tackling kind of some of the infrastructure tasks that large businesses have, selling in 100 different countries, figuring out how you pay sales tax and be compliant and do all of those things in all of those places. So I started Paddle to solve that problem, really trying to scratch an itch that I had in sort of building a company and loving building a product and talking to customers, and not so much dealing with all of the other kind of crap that exists in the background of actually how do you scale operations. So yeah, that's Paddle in a nutshell.
That's Paddle in a nutshell. There's a mixed metaphor. There's something at work there, isn't there? I'm going to take you back. In most people's terms, 13 or so years isn't actually that, or 17 or so years isn't that far back. In your case, that's the age of about 13.
Yes.
There you were as a coder. You were sort of an autodidact. You learnt how to code by watching YouTube videos, and from that came the whole thing. So what sort of work were you doing then as this first-time teenager?
Yeah, I to be honest, I found a computer and the internet at about 13 or 14, and sort of really that was the end of any kind of social life that I would have for the next 2 decades. But I was always fascinated with how stuff works. I distinctly remember like the most told off I was ever in my life was at 12, dismantling my grandparents' VCR in the middle of their video player in the middle of their living room, and telling them I was building them a washing machine. And that kind of then sort of translated to, once I found the internet, like my fixation was just like, how does this work and how do I build stuff for it? So I convinced my parents to buy me a book, and then realized I didn't really enjoy reading the book and sort of instead loved binge watching YouTube videos. So did that and kind of taught myself how to build websites, and then literally as a 14-year-old kid would go door to door in the town I grew up in, selling websites for £50 to local businesses.
Well, could I just take you back? So literally, what, knocking on doors, ringing bells, and say, "Hey, do you want to buy a website? 50 quid, it's yours." I mean, how did you have that sort of personal spark? Because that's quite a big step at that age.
To be honest, I had built. There's only so many websites that you can build as a 14-year-old about skateboarding until you need another topic. So I would just go to like all of the restaurants that we would go to, or the takeaways, or like whatever, who didn't have a website. I would just knock on the door. It'd be like, it'd be really great if I could see the menu of this place. Or my parents talk about wishing they could see the menu online rather than having to rifle through that drawer that everybody has with all the menus that come through the door. To be honest, like most of the responses were always, yeah, sure, like why not? It's sort of a kid who's offering us to build us a website for 50 quid, like why not? And yeah, I kind of you do one, and then you do two, and then word gets around that sort of some absolute moron of a child is going around kind of underpricing everybody on building a website. And yeah, I did that for the next couple of years.
Were the websites any good? Did they work?
They worked, but they weren't any good.
That's a great answer. We're going to go in sort of leaps now. This led on, and it's easy to say in retrospect, but sort of perhaps vaguely naturally, to a software promotion business helping companies offer apps in discount bundles. And you were fairly rapidly turning over 4 million a year. What sort of age were you then? I mean, maybe I've got the chronology a bit condensed.
Yeah, I mean, so the stepping stones into that were going door to door, selling websites for 50 quid, mostly cash. At some point, someone did ask for a receipt or an invoice.
Did you know what that was?
Nope. Went home, immediately Googled it, and then found out like Xero or QuickBooks or something was sort of £10 a month, and me being sort of me at the time said, I'm not paying that. So I taught myself how to build software rather than websites, and started building invoicing software.
As you do.
Yeah, as you do. Tell you, no social life. Started building invoicing software for freelancers and doing time tracking and things like that. And then fell in love with this sort of thing, which was I'm able to like build a product that solves a problem rather than transcribe another Indian restaurant menu, which kind of led me to, okay, I'm not earning this 50 quid going door to door anymore. Maybe I should sell the invoicing software. So I started selling the invoicing software and ran into the classic problem of I'm a child. And
you were aware of that, though, weren't you?
Yeah. I'm a child and have no money, so can't actually market this sort of to anyone. So I came up with an idea, which was I love playing video games and things like that, and could never afford to buy video games. So I would wait for these sort of these discounts where they would take the games that were released sort of a year before, and like 10 or so game developers would get together and they would create like a discounted sort of bundle of like, you can buy these 10 games for 20 quid rather than for 200. And it was great for them because they would get 100,000 new customers sort of like this overnight. It would they would generate some revenue. But also they'd have 100,000 people to sell the next version of the game to when it would come out in a year's time, or in 6 months' time. So I was like, that seems like a great way to get a bunch of free customers. So I then found a bunch of software companies who were building software that I thought was complementary to invoicing. So think kind of if you're a web designer, maybe there's some tools that you use or project management or kind of whatever it is. And I just emailed them all and said like, hey, we are we're building this sort of promotion.
And by the way, were you a we, or were you still a you?
No, we is used sort of loosely in this sort of instance.
It was just you, wasn't it?
It was absolutely just me. And so we are running a promotion, and we'd love to have you involved. And the terms of it are kind of, we're going to sell this. It's going to be 90% off. We're going to take 50% for organizing the whole thing. And by the way, in order to be involved, you have to email it to every single one of your customers. And you multiply that by sort of 9 other companies who actually do have 50 or 100,000 customers, and suddenly you're getting this promotion out to 500,000 or 1 million people kind of overnight. And we did that. We ran the first one. Again, just me. I ran the first one. We did about £500,000 in revenue in the first week.
Good Lord. And you were 16 or so at this point, or 17 maybe?
I think it was 15.
15?
Yeah.
You were still at school and you hadn't persuaded your parents or whatever, decided not to keep on with school, which you left at 16. So £500,000 that first week?
Yeah, of which we got to keep half of, which was great. And then there was a interesting, and then sort of the story of that business is we just kind of kept rinse and repeating until sort of people got bored of it. And we scaled it to sort of, it was about 4 million a year within sort of 9 months or so. Like we really pushed it. And by that point, it was a we, because I hired somebody to sort of answer customer support tickets. But there was a really funny moment when I did the first one, actually, if you don't mind me digressing for a sec. There was a really funny moment where I had a bank account with Nationwide, a child's bank account with Nationwide, and it was I think kind of the room is sort of, I'm probably pretty young in this room, but it was one of those things where you go into the bank and you had that book. And they would like dot matrix print a new line with the balance with your statement in the new book. And I remember going into the bank to deposit like some birthday money or something from my grandparents. It was like a tenner or something. And with my mum, we walk into the bank and they dot matrix. They put the 10 quid in and they dot matrix the line in the book, and it goes sort of like £112, £342. £272,000. At which point my parents didn't know, and we had to have a very awkward coffee afterwards, where I had to convince them I wasn't actually a drug dealer, even though I would have been a very successful one apparently. But but that was the thing that was then the catalyst for me to have a conversation with my parents at 15 about dropping out of school.
And at this point, when you opened a sort of child's bank account, did you get sort of colouring pencils, or were they treating you as the real young kid, or did they think, hang on a second, we've never had a young kid do anything like this? You must have completely stood out in.
There was there was a 20-minute period where they thought there was an error, but sort of
one more naught, or maybe two more noughts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And you quit school at 16, so you did your GCSEs but didn't do A's. Any advice for entrepreneurs here? When you reflect back, do you think that, clearly you have no regrets because it worked out so substantially, do you think you missed out in anything at all, or any advice for entrepreneurs about the role of education in developing their minds?
I think everybody learns in slightly different ways. And for me, although my sort of formal education it probably stopped at 14 if we're really being honest, but stopped officially at 16. Like, I have been a lifelong learner in terms of like just absorbing kind of everything I possibly can and learning in every possible avenue from both other people, from content, from videos, from books, from whatever. So I think I was quite fortunate in that way, in that I actually thrived outside of a structured environment for learning things. But I mean, everybody's different, and kind of for some people, maybe they thrive in a more structured environment, and there's nothing wrong with that.
It is peculiar, isn't it, that conventionally, at least in a formal sense, we think of education as stopping at 16 or maybe even 14, but stopping at 16 or 18 or 21, and that's it. There's no other area of our lives where we sort of stop doing the thing. We continue to develop, and one key point for all entrepreneurs is that sense of curiosity, of wanting to learn, wanting to know. Come through to 2012, where you were all of 18. Gosh, and with Harrison Rose as a co-founder. First of all, how did you two meet? How did you hook up with him?
He was the first person I hired in the other thing. He was the we to my I.
Okay.
I hired him in 2010, 11, something like that, to just help, because as you can imagine, 0 to 4-ish million in 12 months is relatively chaotic. It was just the two of us kind of running that business. I can't actually remember how we met. It was definitely online.
Was it Twitter?
It was something like, it was Twitter or a forum or something like that, and he was making kind of images for people, kind of on, I can't even remember. But we met through that, and we were the same age. He was sort of 40 miles up the road. And he did leave school at 18. So kind of he was doing it kind of evenings and weekends for that kind of 2-3 year period that we were kind of running that business.
And you found as the business developed and this customer base sort of growing exponentially that I think you've said that you were perhaps dealing with effectively a lot of local accountants and local sort of accounting policies. And so the idea was that it prompted you to slightly change tack in terms of the offering you had so that it became a more integrated payment system through to.
So basically running that first business was an absolute mess.
It's a lovely mess. 4 million quid. I think we'd all take that as a mess.
Yeah.
But yes.
It was a mess of a 4 million quid, but it was an absolute mess. I didn't even know what VAT was. Sort of that's how much of a mess it was. And to the point where I certainly didn't know that they had that in other countries as well that I was supposed to be paying. So kind of,
it's all been cleared. Right? Any tax advisors here, it's all sorted,
it's all sorted.
There's no contingent liabilities.
Sort of statute limitations, all that stuff.
Yeah. That's a different thing.
So we had a lot of cleanup to do kind of in that business, and sort of it's one of those things where we were selling these products to hundreds of thousands. We had hundreds of thousands of customers, and no real geographical kind of like nucleus of like where those customers were. So they were pretty evenly spread around sort of Europe, the US, Canada, the UK, kind of everywhere you can imagine we had a customer. And you start hitting all these thresholds in different countries, and then you start getting sort of slightly less nicely worded letters from different government officials. And we didn't have any infrastructure in place to sort of deal with any of this stuff. And I kind of went on this, obviously through partnering with a ton of different software companies, I'd gotten to know a handful of people who were also running similar sized businesses. And one day, I think in a moment of frustration in sort of 2011, 2012, I kind of just blanketly emailed all of them and said, hey, we're really struggling with sort of this tax thing. And there was some other stuff as well of like everybody wanted to pay in a different currency and a different payment method and sort of all of this stuff, which was kind of really quite burdensome for a 1.5 person company at the time. And it was the moment in my life where I realized it's much easier to get somebody to rant at you for 20 minutes about something they hate than something that they love. Because every single one of them came back with either they would call me or they would send me a sort of 14-paragraph email about how absolutely abysmal this was in their business as well, and it was no one's actual job until it all broke, or it was year end, and then it was everybody's job, and all of this stuff. And I initially had sort of emailed not to be like, oh, there's a business here, but it was like, please tell me what to buy to solve this. Like, please tell me what to buy, who to hire, like whatever to solve this. And the two answers that came back were like, they kind of fell into two categories. The slightly larger businesses were like, we've bought this sort of fancy ERP thing that costs us $1 million a year and took 1.5 years to implement. We are not very happy with it, but kind of it sort of works. And then the other group of people were, we have this sort of army platoon of consultants that kind of do various little pieces of this sort of for us, because we have to kind of hire them in each kind of jurisdiction, and sort of we have an authorized representative and they kind of deal with it all. And then we buy an absolute crap load of insurance to make sure that we don't get it wrong. And neither of those seemed like particularly satisfactory answers. So it was sort of at that moment that we spent all of, I think, a week thinking about it, and then was like, actually, we've sort of exhausted our interest more than anything else in running these promotions, and like we've done pretty well out of it. But like, let's start something kind of that is potentially a bit more ambitious, sort of potentially a little bit less transactional, in how do we build this underlying infrastructure for kind of these problems that we kind of intimately knew at that point. And that was the start of Paddle.
That was the start of Paddle, and no business goes smoothly. And you said mess, and I don't think any of us would quite agree with mess, but I can only imagine what that logistically was like. Oh, I wasn't there, no. Clearly the wounds are still there, aren't they? But tell us about the Paddle name shenanigans. You bought the domain, but it got a bit complicated.
Yeah.
And you'd moved to London at this point from Corby. Is that
Yeah,
so?
I moved. I grew up in a town called Corby. It's a great documentary on Netflix called Toxic Town about the town I grew up in, and moved to London in 2013 on Mother's Day. Never do that. And sort of we rented a little flat and kind of we started working on this business and we actually raised money from an angel investor kind of really early, because the one thing that I was very conscious of is we've built a business, we've never built a company. Like we've gone out and we've been successful in going to market and making money and doing all this stuff, but like one thing that we certainly haven't done very well is build the actual sort of the scaffolding and infrastructure around like how do you build a company. We'd never run payroll, we'd never done anything, we clearly hadn't paid our taxes. So it was like, is there a person who I can kind of sit in the corner of their office and bribe their team with chocolates or whatever whenever we have a question about something. So we raised a little bit of money, moved to London, did exactly that, sat in the corner of his office and did that. And one of the first things that we did was the initial thinking, the thesis behind Paddle was sort of we're going to build this infrastructure, but we're also going to build a marketplace. We're going to build the Amazon of buying kind of software, because we thought that was what was needed. So we were like, we need a one-word brandable name that we can use for that. And to be honest, it was a very unromantic story about how we came up with the name. We found it on a list of domain names that were for sale, and we bought it. It was the third highest priced domain purchase of 2012. We paid 120 grand for it. Wow. And turns out trademarks are a thing. So we were actually really excited because we were sitting in the corner of this guy's office and sort of we had incorporated, we bought this name, we put up a little like coming soon sort of page. And then the DHL man walks in and hands us an envelope, and we're sitting there like, yes, we're a real company. We got our first post, and we open it, and it's us being sued for using the name Paddle. So the first endeavor that we had to go on as a business was to actually acquire the company that owned the trademark Paddle, because it itself was going out of business. So we bought it sort of like 2 or 3 days before it was going into administration. Just to acquire the kind of the trademarks around this name, and now basically own the dictionary entry for the word paddle, because sort of I'm not doing that again. But we have been sued 6 more times over using the name Paddle in various countries around the world.
And presumably you around this point had advisors helping you through that IP nightmare. Or maybe you didn't.
Yes.
Maybe you did yourselves.
We did have a lawyer. Who I still know and still sort of occasionally work with to this day. But he helped us sort of navigate through that situation. But I think with all of these things around IP and trademarks, no one ever really wins. It's sort of just sort of a kind of who doesn't give up more than anything else. But yeah, we were being advised. We probably should have taken the advice before we bought the name, though.
Well, there's some good advice about advisors. Bring in advisors at the appropriate time and try to imagine this whole thing about trying to imagine what your future might be. You thought at that age, that time, paddle.com was the name. It's a brilliant name, but the trademarks were an issue. It cost you some money, but you took ownership of that and moved forwards. Talk to us about, we will come on to a couple of audience questions in a moment. We've got so much ground to cover. Talk to us a bit about the funding process, how you as an individual approach that were you effectively more of an advocate than a salesperson? How did you attune yourself to that role, quite dissimilar to your operational role?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundraising is sort of like anything else in running a business. I think it's like you put on your fundraising hat and you speak to the person the other side of the table like a peer to the extent that you can, which is quite difficult when you're 18. But I think that for us the fundraising journey of Paddle was, we didn't really know what fundraising was. We didn't really know that you could raise money other than like angel investments, what you see on Dragon's Den or whatever. So that was the first thing that we did, mostly to get advice rather than money. We didn't really need the money. But then kind of as we started to build and as the business started to grow, we realized that actually this quaint idea of a small business that we were building could actually be something kind of greater than that. And then we're introduced to the world of venture capital and kind of have now sort of 10, 11 years of raising lots of money under my belt. But I think to be quite honest, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I met a VC in probably 2013, 2014, at a fund in London, and they took me into, we had coffee or whatever, and I was taken into the Monday morning meeting, which is sort of the meeting where all the partners sit there and kind of you get a pitch from a founder or two kind of in the morning, and they make a kind of decision on the investment. And I rocked up to that room not knowing, I didn't even know you were supposed to have a deck. I went in, immediately started having an argument about sort of the future of software with a guy who I didn't know that he had sold his company for $8 billion. But the rest of the partners around the room loved it because apparently no one would challenge him on things. And sort of after that meeting, I was taken into the corridor by one of the partners being like, these guys are absolutely never, ever going to do it. But there's something here, I'll do it. And he wrote us a check for, I think, 750 grand personally. And then sort of everything else, my fundraising journey has been sort of, up until the latter stages where it became very deliberate, has been very kind of accidental, sort of to some extent. The guy who we went for a coffee with, who brought us into that Monday morning meeting, I feel like he felt like he owed us one. After that, he joined another firm, and he ended up kind of investing £3 or £4 million in Paddle. I met the investor who led our Series B. On a domestic flight from Chicago to San Francisco. I sat next to him on the plane, and he had a sticker on his laptop of a friend's company. And I got chatting to him on the plane, and he's like, actually, I'm on the board of the company. I don't just like them. So a week and a half after that flight, he invested $14 million.
So that plane ticket, a few hundred quid, maybe a couple of thousand quid or whatever, it turned out to be very fast. It's another example of just the happenstance and the randomness. And also what you've talked about, that for many entrepreneurs, on the one hand, it's the, and I'll say this politely, it's sort of the innocence of not knowing. Sometimes when you don't know what you don't even know is actually a skill. But the other is that sometimes advisors may take the view that you need to be sort of schooled and prepared, but actually letting talent be talent is the greatest authenticity, and that's what investors buy. It's the sort of belief that comes from that. I want to, we're going to truncate this, unfortunately. I want to come through to Paddle corporately, valued at 1.2 billion. I'm going to say dollars. It's probably pounds. Probably pounds.
1.2 billion pounds.
Yeah.
$1.45.
Which is extraordinary. So tell us about your role and how it changed, but then come on to the how and why you stepped down in 2 stages.
Yeah. I had a big COVID. Our business sort of went from, we were a nice business, we were doing about 40, 50-ish million in revenue kind of in 2019. And the business grew 40% in the space of 72 hours when COVID started. If you can imagine, everybody gets locked down, sent home, have to use computers that they've never used for work before. Like the company's sort of corporate credit cards get a little bit sort of warm as people start buying all the software that they need for sort of to kind of operate their businesses from these computers that they've never used for this purpose. So video conferencing software, project management software, everything. So at the same time as we were 200 people in an office in London, immediately going, okay, everybody works from home now, and going through that challenge ourselves, the entire business was sort of on fire in the best possible way. And sort of grew by about 40% in literally 72 hours. We had a map up that we shared with all of the employees, which was like our revenue by country. And you could see a 12-hour delay from when a country went into mandatory lockdown and when our revenue would go up by 40% in the country. So we did that. That was fun. We then raised some money to kind of expand the team. We raised about $60 million. Also did through COVID. Never done a pitch not in person before, so kind of doing that over Zoom, and we raised $66 million to scale the company. Continued pushing through COVID. 2022, kind of things are starting to settle down. Fortunately, we didn't have this big retrenchment in revenue. Like the new baseline persisted. So we grew by 40% and then stayed there and then continued growing. 2022, I wanted to make a big swing and sort of wanted to do stuff that wasn't just payments and billing and operations. We wanted to be material in the growth of these companies as well. So decided to buy a company, spent $200 million buying the company called ProfitWell, which is the largest sort of data analytics platform for software companies, track about $100 billion a year worth of subscription revenue. To do that transaction, raised sort of 220-ish million in equity.
You tried to map this from this 13, 14-year-old boy, 50 quid website to that. It's just almost literally off the scale. You have to have an incredible x-axis, y-axis.
It doesn't feel like that at the time. I think all of these things are incremental. It's sort of like you do one thing, you raise the 3, you sort of like work 18 hours a day for a couple of years, and then you raise 12 and you work 18 hours a day for a few years, and you raise 60, and sort of like each one of these things is incremental. But we did that. We raised the 220-ish million, whatever it was, spent a year kind of buying that company, integrating it, sort of smushing together sort of an organization of 300 people, an organization of 100 people, all the culture clash, operational fun that comes with that. We filmed the whole process as well and released it as a documentary.
Wow.
Called We Sign Tomorrow, which was a fun process, and sometimes I look at and sort of reminisce. But kind of after gone through that process, I was tired. And also like the business had changed. We were doing like 100-odd million in revenue at that point, and sort of the founders of the company that we acquired decided to leave. And I had hired a COO, a guy called Jimmy, who's incredible, as my sort of number 2 a couple of years before. And really kind of the business became, we're going to grow at 30, 40% a year. We're probably not going to make huge swings. We're going to make some relatively big ones. We sued Apple and Google alongside Epic Games, and I spent a year doing that to open up the App Store. But like those were the extent of the swings. They were sort of like very asymmetric upside, sort of small bets, and sort of quite. And then the running of the business became largely operational. So today, Paddle is still growing 50% a year. It's 120, 130 million in revenue. I'm still the largest individual shareholder. It's a kind of a great thing, but I didn't want to I didn't want to make sure the trains ran on time. I didn't want to spend all my time on operations and compliance. And we actually just announced sort of yesterday that there was a lot of screw ups sort of with Paddle. Like yesterday, we paid a $5 million fine to the FTC for 2 customers that we onboarded kind of in 2016, and it was sort of just we're moving such at a pace that sort of everything becomes about compliance and operations, especially when you're dealing with billions and billions of pounds of other people's money that are flowing through. So I didn't want to do that anymore, and Jimmy was sort of incredibly capable hands of steering that ship and helping that continue to compound. So I stepped back kind of 24 months ago or so into initially executive chairman. No one still to this day can tell me what that means. But I was still sort of playing around with product stuff. And then we went through this awkward dance of like nobody actually knew what Christian's job was anymore.
Well, it's now board observer, isn't it? So it's
oh yeah, I don't know what that means either.
I was going to ask you.
I still get invited to stuff, so that's nice. But yeah, they accused me of doing a lot of what they described as swoop and pooping, which is...
That'll be an American thing.
Yeah, which is when I would go into a meeting and then sort of, quite frankly, shit all over it.
I think Brits call that seagull management. It's the same thing.
So after that, I decided to go, like, I'm going to be out of the operations of this business. I'm going to be on the board. I'm going to kind of help out and be sort of the biggest cheerleader of them that I possibly can. And yeah, figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
This is such an extraordinary story. We are running it a little bit late. So I'll pause at this moment. We'll come on to what next for Christian in a sec. Any 1 or 2 perhaps audience questions, please. Otherwise, we'll crack on. I think we're all sort of like, what? Sort of completely overwhelmed. Please say your company, your name and your company name as well, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello. Declan Bradley from Doyle Clayton. So I'm on the advisor side, so it's probably a dangerous question. But are you glad you didn't use advisors at the start? Or you may never have taken the risks that you did.
Naivety is a wonderful thing, I think, when you're an entrepreneur, because I think if I knew everything that I knew now about sort of what it would take to start Paddle and all the absolute rubbish that we would have to go through, I probably wouldn't bother, or I'd probably do something else. Kind of if I knew everything. So I think that we still yet to use anyone to, we raised about 300 million and we have never used an advisor for fundraising. We used a lot of advisors when we bought that company. But kind of, and they were invaluable in helping us sort of like deal with that transaction. But I think it's like play to your strengths. Like I know like we have hell of a lot of advisors around taxes. And sort of all of the things that we aren't core competencies of mine or ours as a business, sort of very quickly we learned to get help, and then everything else that we felt confident in, we still remain to do ourselves.
So as a slightly more general point, it's sort of know your limits, have that self-awareness, say that, yeah, we believe we've got competency here, query that, maybe, but we believe we've got competency, but we definitely haven't here, so we bring in advisors. Thank you, Declan. Another question, I see a hand over here somewhere. Yeah, just here in the front row, please. We got the mic. Thanks.
Morning, Michael Tilston from Mortgage Quarter. It was just, I suppose, around kind of, you mentioned you're still the majority shareholder. So it was, when did you start to think about relinquishing some of the control by actually selling off the shareholdings? I know that's something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they set up, it's kind of like, it's mine. I don't want to let it go.
I think probably very quickly I realized that the only way to build, I had built a nice business. I'd never built a big business. And I realized that for the rest of my life, I wanted to build big businesses and I wanted to build them from scratch. And I just don't think, I think it's sort of a problem shared and all that stuff. Like in terms of, I knew that we weren't going to succeed in building a huge business sort of without people along the way. And sort of when, like every single person who's ever worked at Paddle has equity in Paddle, for example. But kind of knew along the way that sort of that wasn't, we were going to have to bring people on board. And whether you're the majority shareholder or minority shareholder or anything else, like none of that stuff sort of broadly actually matters in terms of like governance perspective and everything else. Like sort of you can have a minority shareholder who has certain rights that can kind of hold you over a barrel if they really want to. So I think like separating economic interest from sort of governance is sort of one thing that we learned to do very, very early. And we, like me and the employees and the management and sort of my co-founder, like we maintained a lot of economic interest in the business. But when you're raising $200 million from KKR, like they want some rights. And I think that sort of you just have to be amenable to that.
Very good. We'll take one more, if we may. Again, I think there's a hand. Did I see another hand over here? Am I imagining it? I possibly was. Yeah. And I'm sorry, this will be the last one. Apologies for those who got your hands up.
Thank you. Hi, Christian. Great story. Absolutely incredible. Paul Burden, by the way, from PerformWell. I'm really interested to hear the other side of your experience, in so much as you've gone through an incredible journey with what must have been incredible highs of raising capital, incredible things happening, the money coming in, but also some moments where you're being faced with being sued, letters from governments, from HMRC, etc. Can you just talk a little bit about the emotional roller coaster that you experienced and how you managed your emotions during this?
Yeah, it's definitely a roller coaster. You have the best day of your life and the worst day of your life, sometimes in the same day. So,
well, if you're working 18 hours, so there's more options.
Yeah. The 5 to 9 before the 9 to 5. I think every single time, other than being sued, because that's happened quite a few times, every single like one of these instances have been sort of like the first time experiencing it. So I think that I learned relatively quickly to keep a pretty level head about stuff. And like my mantra, to the point where it got irritating for a lot of people in the company, is sort of nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. Like, we can get the best press in the world and everything is on fire internally. And you're coming to things like this and everybody's like, congratulations on raising the money or buying that thing or whatever. And then like you go back to the office and there's like literally people crying.
Or having a £5 million fine.
Yeah, that was yesterday. So
that's gone already, has it?
that's been a 2-year ordeal. Okay. But I think that sort of me keeping in the back of my head that nothing is two things. Nothing is as good or bad as it seems, and I think you have to calibrate your own emotions towards sort of the actual reality of something versus like the perceived reality of it. And sort of the fact that most decisions that we make in business, like we have to make 100 of these decisions a day, 99% of them don't matter at all to the outcome. Like maybe we have to make 1 or 2 really big, important decisions a year. And we probably shouldn't just worry about the 99 others. We should spend a lot of time thinking about and considering like, the 1 or 2 that matter. And I think you get better at calibrating what those 1 or 2 are. And the second thing is, don't worry about stuff. I know that's super easy to say. But like worrying about it means that you have to go through the pain and the turmoil of dealing with it twice. Like once when you worry about it, once when it actually happens. So like I just at some point was just like, there's so many times over this journey that I've worried about something that just didn't materialize. And so many times I haven't worried about something and then got completely punched in the face by it. That like, what's the point in worrying? Like I have no agency or control over this situation anyway. So like, yeah, it's so much easier sort of to sit up here and say that than it is to actually do in reality. And I don't have any kind of quick tips on how to get there, but yeah, I think that's it.
You don't have any quick tips, but you've certainly given a very strong steer, and thank you, Paul, for that question. We're going to come to the end on 2 areas for you, Christian. One, you fairly recently moved to Bath, so what's the attraction of the region? And of course, 2, what's next for you? Are you going to go again? You're going to invest? You're going to, whatever, advise?
Yeah.
What's your future?
Attraction to the region. My sister-in-law was having a baby and she lived in Bath, so we moved to Bath. And then I fell in love with it after moving here, or moving there. And sort of, I just think it's a great place to call home. It's still extremely connected to sort of everywhere that you need to be. And I think post-COVID, like certainly I am much more flexible as to sort of where I'm based, regardless of sort of where the rest of the team are. What's next? I had an interesting thing post-paddle where I raised 5-6 million quid from a bunch of investors who had backed me before, who were like, "Do you want 5 million quid? We don't know what you're going to do with it, but maybe you'll figure something out." And so I was like,
"Does that often happen?"
So I was like,
for a friend.
I was like, "Yep, cool, let's do that." And then felt like absolute crap for 6 months as I was spending other people's money to try and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So gave most of it back, gave 4.8 million of it back. And then sort of took a minute, went on holiday, probably should have done that earlier. Came back and then sort of just can't help myself. So I'm currently starting another business, just raised 14 million for that. And kind of we'll be kicking it off in the next couple of weeks.
I don't want to bounce you publicly, Christian, which means I'm going to do it, but would you like to come back next year to EntreConf and tell us about that new business and its journey within those 12 months, and God knows what it is, or indeed more particularly where you'll be?
Yes, would love to. And also hopefully it lasts more than the 2 months that the last one did. So, but yeah, I would love to.
Thank you. Well, I've let this run long because there is so much ground to be covered. I'd just like to, a couple of thanks. Firstly to Isio, to Max and Mark. Thank you so much for being our partners on this session. A round of applause to Isio. We will be hearing from Christian later. He's one of our experts on the panel for Pitch Case at 3:30 today, 5 companies pitching, and to hear insights born of this experience will be invaluable to those companies and indeed to all of you. But I do think on all our behalf that this remarkable story, the almost unbelievable development from a 13-year-old coder, self-taught through YouTube, through to running that business, through to the world in which you inhabited and created through Paddle is quite remarkable. But also, I think almost as remarkable, hearing the story, is your level-headedness. That we didn't. None of us knew you then, but it strikes me that you probably haven't changed a huge amount since then in terms of your attitude to life. That sense of cope with it, live with it, figure it out. Get on with it, but don't be, worried by it so much. Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure, and a big round of applause. Christian Owens, please. Thank you. Thank you. That was brilliant. Loved it.